challenge, it's a photographic challenge. They say, we want you to do this, and it's just like, how do you make that?
Do you, sorry, am I is that right? Do you carry the same style to both documentary and like commercial work? Or do you think, right, I've got like 5 different styles, which one do you like?
I try and sort of essentially it be me, but as I said, like I like portraits that are quite composed and well lit, and I use that style to photograph real people. You know, so I've travelled with equipment and photographed, for instance, in Gun Nation, I photographed the presidents of gun companies with their guns, and they hated that when it came out because normally they don't like to even talk about it. But I came to a convention not unlike this, which was a gun convention, and set up a studio and invited them to be photographed, and they thought that I was, you know, like part of the show really, so they just did it. Whereas if I'd gone up and said, I work for the Sunday Times magazine, will you pose? They'd have been like, absolutely not. So that style I use for documentary, but equally that style of photography could be used for a very normal corporate portrait of the same businessman without a gun. You know what I mean? It's just, we're subverting it. And sometimes, you know, advertisers want a documentary style as well.
If Prada rocked up and said, we really want to do this,
Prada? Yeah, I mean, if it was well paid and yeah, I mean, you know, the fashion world, it's sort of silly, but it's not offensive. It's just, it exists. And yeah, I wouldn't sort of think, I wouldn't think, I can't do it. I'm such a purist, I can't possibly do that. I would literally think, how long will it take? How much will I get paid? And what will I do with that money elsewhere? I mean, it was that simple. And there might be other issues like, you know, how agonising will it be to do that job, or will it be funny and interesting? And the other thing is, I was thinking about this as I came here, because I had a phase where I thought I'm going to just stop doing commercial work, I'm going to stop doing silly, pointless jobs. And then, and I did do that to finish Love Me. I had to do it just to finish the book, because I was never quite having enough time to complete it. But what I realised is that by cutting all that off, I was then at home with my thoughts too much, and I needed to be out doing things, and that sort of stimulates your mind. And often, even if you're doing something which someone might argue is a bit corporate and boring, I don't know, something happens, you always end up in a conversation with someone, or think of photographing something else. And so I just think you need to be kind of active in different areas, you know, but everyone works differently, you know, and you've got to find your own way.
Okay, that's okay. Is any other questions? Yes, Joe.
Hello, just two questions very quickly. What things do you think that you can point to helped you find your own voice as a photographer? And the second is, do you find a project like Gun Nation, the way that people now react to photographers is so defensive and so protective? I find the idea of going to a conference and setting up photographing heads of gun companies almost unbelievable now. You couldn't do that. Do you agree or disagree?
Why do you think you couldn't do that now?
Because I'd have to lie so blatantly to do it.
Well, that's a good point actually. I think being a photographer, as I said, because of the equipment being more advanced, you know, the problem is there's a little crisis going on in photography for established photographers where, say you're a sort of picture library type photographer supplying your picture library, suddenly the market is saturated by very good images taken by amateurs all over the world who will sell their work cheaply. So there's an issue there. Just remind me of that question again.
Basically, it's how to find your voice. How do you find your voice photographically? And the second one was about the whole situation, I suppose, of having the confidence, the courage to go into those situations as a photographer.
I mean, a lot of photography is less about the technical nature now, I think, and it's more about ideas. It's more about being a sort of anthropologist or working out how to create a situation with someone. And in a way, it's not about getting a picture in focus and well exposed, but it's about how do you set that studio up and talk people into being photographed, or how do you come up with a theme that's interesting that a magazine will be interested in. So
yeah, I think that's one of the key things as well, isn't it? It's very easy sometimes you can say, well, I did Gun Nation and this is what I did and I went and did that, but to a lot of people it would be absolutely unimaginable to take those kinds of risks or be willing to put yourself on the line like that. And I think that is what, when you talk about Don McCullum as an example, I mean, his book is quite depressing. Well, in fact, it's probably one of the most depressing books you'll ever read. But at the same time, it's an incredibly sad book because you see how his life has been lived through photography. And I think that's the difference. I'm going to put words in wrong, but between someone who takes pictures and someone who's a photographer who's willing to go to that length as you did at Columbine, and you were willing to fly there and put yourself into an awkward position or an uncomfortable position.
Yeah, and I think photography is a slightly uncomfortable job. I find, that moment where you have to go and photograph someone, it's never easy. You always have to take a deep breath and sort of, if you're going to photograph someone in the street, is it easy? I don't think so. You have to get yourself in the frame of mind, force yourself into that role. And the same with these projects. Each time I start a new one, I think, how do you do it? I can't remember how I did it. I can't remember what made it work. And the truth is, it's not because it was a golden era 10 years ago and that gun manufacturers let you photograph them. When I walked into the convention, I walked around with a 35mm camera, and people basically told me, they asked me to leave. The security, practically escorted me out. People just didn't want to be photographed. And as I said, I sort of ended up building a studio. I made myself into a ridiculously spectacle, really.
So you made yourself into an exhibitor?
Essentially, yeah.
Right.
And that worked in that context. Do you see what I mean? So there's no trick to it. I didn't have that as a plan. And equally, there's those moments where you think, it didn't work, I'm going to go home. I did a story about a fat convention. This is an example because I rang them. The magazine assigned me to do that story in America, and I thought that's really going to be interesting. And then the